Hello. Good afternoon. We can get started. So it's my very great honor to introduce Father Joseph Fessio to you this afternoon. Father Fessio, as most of you know, was a longtime friend of our late and beloved Dean and Professor David L. Schindler. Indeed, he and Dr. Schindler met in 1961 when the two were both in the Jesuit novitiate. Following his priestly ordination in 1972, Father Fessio earned his doctorate from the University of Regensburg, West Germany, under the tutelage of then Father Joseph Ratzinger, studying the ecclesiology of Hans Urs von Balthasar at the suggestion of Father Henri de Lubac. So, it's hard to beat that. It was during this period that the international theological journal Communio was founded under the guidance of Balthasar, de Lubac, Ratzinger, and others. And it was through his friendship with Father Fessio that Dr. Schindler became editor-in-chief of the English language edition of that journal, early on. We were talking about that before. Father Fessio went on to found Ignatius Press in 1978 to make the works of great 20th century European theologians available in English, including Ratzinger, Balthasar, and de Lubac, as well as such important figures as Louis Bouillet, Adrien von Speyer, and many more. In the decades since, the Ignatius Press catalog has come to include hundreds of authors and thousands of titles. It would be difficult to measure the contribution Ignatius Press has made to the church in America through its valuable translations and publications of many, many important books. But Father Fessio's work and initiatives have contributed to the church in many other ways as well. Over the years, he has taught philosophy and theology at Gonzaga University, the University of Santa Clara, and the University of San Francisco, where my wife went, actually, and where he founded the St. Ignatius Institute. He was also the founding provost of Ave Maria University in Florida. Today, he will offer reflections on the origins of Communio and the contribution of several Ressourcement theologians. Almost. I got to finish. You got to give me a chance to finish here. After his talk, there will be time for questions, and after that, please stick around for the reception. Thank you for agreeing to be with us today, Father. Please join me in welcoming Father Fessio.
Thank you, Dean Crawford. If you appreciate him being your dean, then I'll take the praise for that. He was a lawyer in San Francisco back in the 90s, and unlike many lawyers, he saw the light and became a convert to the Catholic faith. And this story I know from his wife, who told me during the reception for Dave Schindler's funeral, that she called me up at Ignatius Press and told me that her husband now wanted to study theology. Did I have any suggestions where he should go? I said, of course, JP2 in D.C. So that's how we got here. So I'd like to take credit for that because I need all the credit I can get when I meet our Lord for any good thing I might have done. This may or may not be as memorable a visit for me as the last time I was here at McGivney Hall. Because the last time I had, I forget where I was coming from, but I changed planes in Newark, and I always take the back of the bus, because those are the cheap seats back there. And I'm getting off the plane, everybody else is off, and as I walk up the aisle, I see this wad of money in one of the first class seats, seat A3. And so I picked it up. It was $800 bills. So I got off the plane, I went to the American Airlines desk. I said, look, flight number, whatever it was, seat A3, $800 to say, if someone says they lost money, here's my card, call me, and I'll see if they get the right amount, So anyway, got to D.C., And somehow I got out here on campus, and I was parked across the street there. I'm walking across the campus, and this guy, Indian guy, he sees me and moves towards me. Walks up. Hey, Father, can you help me out? Can you help me out, Father? I said, man, this is your lucky day. The smallest bill I have is 100. So here you go. So that was my last trip here to McGivney Hall. I offered to give some reflections about the origins of Communio Journal, and I think I will start in medias res, as they say. I was in Fourvière, which is the old Roman forum, Vetus Forum, or Forum Vetus of the Romans. It was established in the 40s BC. Or do you say BC here, Catholic University? Anyway, BC, I say BC. And I was studying theology as a not yet ordained Jesuit, scholastic we called ourselves. And I'd been befriended by Father de Lubac. He at the time was seen as kind of dépassé, old school, old fashioned. So they didn't care much about him. I cared about him though. And he was my mentor. He gave me ideas, things to read and so on. And even when because he was wounded in World War I, at Verdun, he had shrapnel wound. In fact, he had the longest Jesuit novitiate in the history of the order because he was a novice in 1913. We have a 2-year novitiate. And then 1914, the war broke out, and so they're all mobilized. He was a stretcher bearer for 5 years. And then when the war ended in 1918, he became a novice 2nd year. So basically, he had a 7-year novitiate. But he always had this frail health because of that shrapnel wound. And every so often, he would just be bedridden for a while. And I would come down to see him and talk to him. And just, by the way, I'm an old man now, so I can wander. I've got the excuse just to wander here and there when I tell stories. But here's a little box story. He was bedridden. And I came in, he wanted to celebrate Mass, and I was going to serve his Mass. And so he's lying in his bed, he's got his Greek New Testament over here, looking at it. And he says, look at this, he said. This is 1 Thessalonians. This is the very first Christian document we know. And look at the first 6 verses. Father, Son, Spirit, faith, hope, charity, and prayer. It's all there. It's all there. It was like a little child. He had that sense of wonder, which is beautiful. And then he insisted to say Mass, to put on, he was in, a bathrobe and everything. He put on his shoes. I can't say Mass in slippers. He said, I have to say Mass in my shoes, So I took him down the hallway. We had Mass together. But I was in his room at one point talking to him. And by the way, I lived in the Bourbon Palace, they called it, Palais Bourbon. In the old Jesuit scholasticate there was a center wing, and it was 4 stories tall, but they put in a 5th story, kind of ramshackle, and some of us scholastics lived up there. But he was down on the 4th floor with a room on the end. I would go down there once in a while and visit with him. So I'm in his room, and the phone rings. So, I get up to leave. Oh, no, that's okay, stay there. So I hear one half of the conversation. Oh, no, thank you very much, I really can't. No, not this year. It's not possible. Click. I said, what was that all about? He said, well, that was Cardinal Villot, Secretary of State. And he wants me to make sure I come to the annual meeting of the International Theological Papal Commission, But I can't go. I'm not feeling well, and there's no one to go with me. I said, well, I'll go with you. Would you? So, well, sure. Calls him back up. Hey, I'm coming, So that was my first trip to Rome, because I'm part Italian, and when I was there in France the first time, I hadn't been to Italy, I hitchhiked down to Italy to see where my ancestors were from. But this was my second trip, but it was paid for by the Vatican on a plane, and I got a window seat going over the Alps. It's spectacular. So we come into Rome for this meeting, and I'm kind of his chaperone, so to speak, and we stay at the Bellarmino. The Bellarmino is the residence in Rome near the Pantheon, where Jesuit graduate students often stay. And so we're staying there. And the first thing that happens is that the Jesuit general at the time, Father Pedro Rupe, had always told de Lubac, whenever you're in Rome, come to see me. But of course, de Lubac wasn't very mobile, so Rupe came to visit him. So I go down to the front door, and I escort Rupe up to the room, and I leave them. And then a half hour later, I escort him back. I said, what'd you talk to him about? These three things I told him. I forget the first two. But he said, the third thing was, he said, you know, Father General, under your leadership, the Society of Jesus, this was 1960, 71, 72, something like that. Under your leadership, the Society of Jesus has become known as the resistance to all things from the Pope and from the papacy. If you continue that, you will destroy the society. Now, de Lubac was a very mild-mannered, very moderate man, but he really told the general what he thought was happening, and of course, it's happened. When I entered the society, there were 36,000 Jesuits. Now there's 14,000. I'm among the younger of them. So we're in Rome, and the second thing that happens is that de Lubac is asked to give a conference at San Luigi dei Francesi, St. Louis of the French, which is on Piazza Navona there. And so I escort him there, and he's giving this talk. And he's giving a talk on the role of Peter and the early papacy in the church. And he just got out of bed. He was sick, you know. He's an old man at the time. He's kind of stumbling in. He sits down at the table, and I'm sitting there. And how's this remembering? I'm sitting in between Hans Urs von Balthasar and Karl Wojtyła. And so he gives this talk, and it's like watching the resurrection. All of a sudden, as he's talking about the papacy, about the Pope, he just comes alive. And finally, it's over, like a big symphony ends with a great crescendo, and everybody's clapping, and he grabs my hand and says, I need to take a walk. Okay, so we go outside. He turns to me and he says, J'ai fait mon devoir comme jésuite. J'ai défendu le pape. I've done my duty as a Jesuit. I've defended the Pope. It was beautiful. He's a holy man. So then we go to the meeting of the Papal Theological Commission. And I'll tell you in a moment all who is there. And I remember one lunch, because in those days, Lonergan was all the rage. Insight, that was the book, especially among Jesuits. And I was at the table I had with Lonergan, de Lubac, Bouillet, who else was there? Ronner. And they're having a conversation. And of course, Bouillet and de Lubac were so cultured. And it goes off on all sides of topics. Almost on every topic, Lonergan would say, oh yes, in chapter 22, I covered that in my chapter 22 of Insight, Oh, I did that in chapter 9. His whole world was what he'd written in Insight. I thought, what a bore, he really was. Now, he may be a holy man, I don't know, but compared to someone like de Lubac and Bouillet, with this breadth of knowledge and culture, it was a pretty far second place. In any event, that was the moment, I say, in medias res, having to do with the Communio journal, that was when they were discussing. It wasn't the first time, because this was, I'm not sure what year it was probably 71, the fall of 71, but it wasn't 69, and it could have been 70, and it wasn't 72, I don't think. In any event, they're talking about Communio, and what did I know? I mean, here I was, how old was I then? I was 31 years old or something like that, and didn't know how to do anything. I mean, I was an engineering student, I liked to build things, but they're talking about the French edition, the German edition, and so on. And I said, well, let's have an American edition, I'll see if I can help on that, And so that was when Balthasar said, okay. I went back to get ordained in 1972, and Balthasar said, well, get in touch with Andre Emery. She was the superior of a secular institute called Our Lady of the Way. And so I did. down in Los Angeles, and we met there, and I got together Jim Hitchcock, Dave Schindler, Father John Sheets, and Father John Hickey Wright, which is a mistake that I made. There might have been a couple of others there, but that was kind of the core that began Communio Journal in English. And I'm not sure you mentioned, Dean Crawford, whether or not it was Jim Hitchcock, who was the first editor until David got finished from his doctoral studies, or whether David was, at the very beginning, editor-in-chief. But in any event, Dave became editor-in-chief, and that was when it began in the United States. By the way, just to get things straightened out here, Dave Schindler the Elder is a far superior athlete compared to me as a basketball player. And we're about the same height, but he was much bigger, and he played center. But I would always beat him. Yes, now you remember, because I had this left hook. You can't block a hook shot, right? And I had a left hook shot, and so I'd always make that left hook. So he was a much better player, but I did beat him every time we played one-on-one. Okay, so that was how the thing got started here in the United States at Andrew Emery's house. We did all that. Now I want to talk about how I got there in the first place. Again, I'm just here having fun, okay? So if you guys enjoy it, fine, but I'm going to enjoy it because God's been, I look back on my life, I'm really blessed, I think about the people I've known and what they spent in my life. But back in 1967, 68, at the University of Santa Clara, I got this idea that we had to do something for the poor. And so I started a program called Project 50. We went to East San Jose, which is a poor part of San Jose. I went to this great big grammar school. And I said, look, I want your teachers to get together. I want you to give me the names of 50 8th graders going into high school. 2 criteria. I don't care what ethnicity they are, what race they are. 2 criteria. The teachers think, number 1, that they have college ability. Number 2, they'll drop out of high school, because almost all of them dropped out of high school. I want those 50. So we had these 50 students come on campus for Project 50, and it was a wonderful thing. And Father Michael Buckley, Cornelius Michael Buckley, helped me on that. He's kind of the co-founder of it. But this was the 60s, okay? This is San Francisco. This is hippies. This is flower time, right? And so I decided I better try and grow a beard. And so I tried to grow a beard by pretty easy. You just don't shave, but nothing much happened. But it turned out that the president of the university the year before, when I started this thing, Father Pat Donahoe, had become provincial. And my rector, Father Copeland, was an old World War II Army chaplain down the line, disciplined, and I was the only scholastic at Santa Clara, so he was very upset. I heard about it. So it wasn't much of a beard anyway, so I shaved the beard, but I went to visit the provincial, and Father Buckley came with me. I could just tell him, look, I'm not a rebel. I want to be a good Jesuit and be obedient, so I'm going to shave my beard. He just laughed, and he said, have you ever thought about going to France for theology? I said, no. You want to think about it? Yeah, think about it. So on the way back to Santa Clara with Father Buckley, I decided I'm going to go to France. And so growing that beard was what led me to get into France, right? I'm in France there, and no one else cares about de Lubac but me. So I had him full time. I actually became his secretary because he was very sick a lot of the time. He'd dictate to me. I don't know how I did it now because I never did learn French very well, but he'd dictate to me. I'd type the letters out and give them to me. He'd sign them. And so he was really my closest, adult there as a mentor. And when it came time for me to do my doctoral studies, I went to him and said, Father de Lubac, my provincial wants me to go on for doctoral studies. What topic do you think would be good? He says, Hans Urs von Balthasar, the greatest theologian of our time and maybe all time. I thought, oof, that's a pretty good recommendation. All right, well, and where should I do this? Well, there's a fine young theologian in Ratisbon, Regensburg, Professor Ratzinger. I'll write him on your behalf. So de Lubac writes to Ratzinger, because Ratzinger was not taking it anymore. So he had dozens of doctoral students, okay? But de Lubac writes Ratzinger on my behalf, and that's how I became a doctoral student of Joseph Ratzinger. And at the time, he was in his 40s. I thought, well, de Lubac he's a master scholar. He's a tremendous scholar. Von Balthasar, great breadth and depth, and also just original thinker. And Ratzinger, probably a good popularizer, probably is able to bring this into a more popular form. Well, I sure learned something different from that. I have to tell you, I can tell you a lot of stories about going to his classes. I'll just tell you one story, because people always ask, well, give me some anecdotes. My good friend, Father Vincent Toomey, from Ireland, was with me as one of the many doctoral students of Ratzinger, and we go to these things called Hauptseminare, the graduate seminar. And Father Toomey, had previously been to one of Rahner's Hauptseminars. And he said in Rahner's seminar, one student would make a presentation, and then Rahner would speak for the rest of the 2 hours. With Ratzinger, totally different. One of us would give a presentation, we'd start discussing. He made sure that everybody spoke, and I was very reluctant to speak because I couldn't speak German, But he said, well, Father Fessio, what do you think about this, And so, I'd make my little contribution. But he said almost nothing for the 2 hours. But at the end of the 2 hours, in 2 or 3 beautiful, long German sentences, he would summarize all that had taken place, putting everything in its context, where everybody had contributed. It was just beautiful the way he listened, very humbly, and then synthesized and made everybody better by the synthesis. It was a beautiful experience with him there. Okay, so that's how I got there. Now what about, so that's history of the American edition and my involvement with it. But how did it even get started at all? Well, I just got this book a couple of months ago by Manfred Lochbrunner, okay? He's a German historian, theologian. Hans Urs von Balthasar, Die Biographie eines Jahrhundert-Theologen, the biography of a century theologian, a theologian for this century, It's 716 pages and more, and it's kind of a strange biography because it's not narrative. He's very, very Germanic in this sense that he's going for all the original sources. He goes through Balthasar's life year by year, every talk he gave, every retreat he gave, every trip he took, and then he's got letters from de Lubac and from Emil Lersch and others and Pieper, and he'll quote these letters. And so you get this story of Balthasar's life is very objective, but also gives you this sense of all the people that Balthasar was in contact with, because of these letters. So this book has the prehistory, if you will, of Communio magazine. And it starts here on page 421. 421 here. So Balthasar had founded in the mid-47, something like that, 48, he founded a secular institute, Ivan von Speyer, his directee, called Johannesgemeinschaft. And in 1968, he wanted to find a place where they could have a villa for some recreation. And he found this place on the mountain called the Rigi, R-I-G-I. And the place is called Rigi Häuslein. Häuslein meaning a little house, okay? Well, this place is, it's on this mountain. It's surrounded on 3 sides by the Vierwaldstättersee. And on the 4th side is a steep mountain. You can't get there by car. There's 2 ways to get there. There's a cog railway, a train that has a gear thing that goes up the tracks. And the other one from Vegas, which is near Lucerne on the other side of the lake there, it's a Seilbahn, Teleferique. I don't know what you call it in English. It's one of those things, it's like a ski lift, except it's got like a cabin, What do they call those things? Gondola? Okay, gondola. I thought those things were, you go in the Venice canals. Okay. But, so, they got this beautiful place, and Goethe was there, and there's a plaque commemorating his being there, where it just says, Rings die Herrlichkeit der Welt, all around the glory of the world, Goethe. The other thing was, and I wish I would have taken a picture, I didn't have a camera, but I wish I would have had one. There was a sign telling people not to pick the alpine flowers. It was in 4 or 5 languages. And I'll never forget this sign because the first English said, please do not pick the alpine flowers. The French said, on ne pique pas les fleurs d'alpin. One does not do this, The German says, es ist nicht vernünftig, die Alpenblumen zu pflücken. That is, it's not reasonable. The Italian, è strettamente vietato. It's strictly forbidden to do it. The Swiss are in between all these countries. They not only know the language, but they know the culture, they know the temperament of these people. It's beautiful. Anyway, that was the Rigi. And it turns out that he bought it in 1968. The summer of 68, between Tuesday, the 30th of July, Sunday, the 28th of July, and Tuesday, the 30th, who visits Balthasar there but Joseph Ratzinger? Okay? And what do they talk about? This comes from a letter that Balthasar writes to Pieper. He says, when your brief came here, Ratzinger was here, and we spoke intensively about the idea that Schindler had proposed earlier, and which you would have a part. And here was the plan. A manifesto from Catholic theologians and philosophers in Germany, and eventually France, on the situation of the church and the church's teaching. One, a basic outline, which I would do, Balthasar says. 2, we'd get 6 or 7 people, present it to them, and we'd rework the thing and revise it. 3, then we would get 40 to 50 well-known theologians and philosophers and other people to sign this thing. And 4, we'd print this. And the committee was going to be Pieper, Schlier, Heinrich Schlier, the great exegete, Rudolf Schnackenberg, Walter Kasper, parenthesis, so that a younger person could be there, because he was younger at the time, Ratzinger, and myself. So they were going to meet on October 13th in Würzburg to discuss this manifesto, okay? So this is 68 now, and they want Rahner to be part of this thing. And so Balthasar is going to write Rahner. The problem is that in 1966, Balthasar wrote this book called Cordula, or the Ernstfall, we call it the Mono-Christian Witness, which is a criticism of many theological trends, including by name Rahner. He does it in a very, gentlemanly way, courteously, but it's a direct attack on this Mareschalian, Kantian, transcendental Thomism that had a lot of value to it, but for Balthasar, you lost a sense of the concrete call to martyrdom. Do anonymous Christians become martyrs? Well, no, they don't. You're a martyr when you've known Jesus Christ and his love for you and his Sacred Heart bought your redemption, and you're willing to give your life too for him and for others because of him. So that's his criticism, basically. It's quite good. If you haven't read this book, I recommend it to you very much. Also, there's another book by Balthasar. This is in 1966, I think, was written, the first edition. But he wrote in 1952 a book called Schleifung der Bastionen, the raising of the bastions. He wrote this in 1952, prior to the council. This is the glory days of the church, at least in the United States when I grew up. But he's already showing what the problems are in this kind of change of epochs that we're going through. And you see almost the entire thematic of the council on the role of the lady in that book, Raising the Bastions. Wonderful book. Okay, so they're going to meet in Würzburg, and I think it's Würzburg. Yeah, Würzburg. But so now Balthasar writes a letter to Rahner to ask him to come to this meeting. But he knows that Rahner's been very upset because of Cordula. So, dear Karl, Wild, Heinrich Wild was the editor-in-chief or the director for Kösel Verlag, a publisher in Germany that published that same year. They published Ratzinger's Introduction to Christianity. And he was in on the plan to publish this little manifesto. So Wild has spoken about the Würzburg plan with you. You didn't know about it before that because Ratzinger put me under holy obedience not to say anything, but he forgot to tell you. Okay. I wanted to send you something that would, be not simply a form letter, but because I've heard that you were very upset by my Cordula, and with difficulty can I retract anything I said there. But Schlier yesterday had also counseled me not to do so. But perhaps you read the afterword of the third edition of this, in which I bring in de Lubac as the judge between us, and that happens in the afterword on this thing. The horrible thing, das Schreckliche, which I also said, is this, that even your most defensible thesis on Christology, von den 1000 dummen Simplifikatoren, from 1,000 dumb simplifiers, have been misused. So my idea was to have a little book of theses, Klarstellungen, clarifications. We were right, with some of the best-known theologians would contribute to it, and that would be neither from the official church nor from the ultras misusable. That is, it couldn't be used by the overly traditional curia as a call to go back to the past with no change. Excuse me, that would be the ultras who wanted to not change anything. Anyway, he wanted to be kind of free of their influences. Ratzinger, Schlier, and de Lubac have found this effort good and necessary. With Ratzinger, we got together a little committee, Schlier, Schnackenberg, you, Rahner, Ratzinger, Pieper, Kasper, from Ratzinger as a young theologian proposed, but he zog vorsichtig den Kopf aus der Schlinge, that is, took his neck out of the noose. I mean, he was a young rising theologian. He did not want to be publicized in a very controversial document like this. So he's still writing to Ratzinger here. Okay, so we're going to go to Würzburg. Schnackenberg's going to put us up. It seems to me, says Balthasar, you'd be very necessary because you have 100-fold technical knowledge in such things, and I, as a non-council, Nick Conciliar, one wasn't the council, I don't have those abilities. I would create a map with a lot of white spaces on it that it would take you, with your knowledge of all the different situations, to fill in. Calls him an Ortskundigen Globetrotter. Rahner, called by Balthasar, someone who's just traveled all over the place theologically and knows what to put in this document. So it seems that, according to Lochburner here, that Rahner declined. It wasn't part of this committee. So now we get to the 1969 and the meeting of the Papal Theological Commission. And I'm sure I wasn't there at the time because I only got to France in September '69, and I couldn't even speak the language. But this is the first year when they kind of dumped the idea of this manifesto and decided instead to have this magazine. So who were the members of this initial meeting of the Pontifical International Theological Commission? Karl Rahner, from Germany, West Germany, Karl Rahner, Joseph Ratzinger, Rudolf Schnackenberg. From East Germany, Heinz Schurmann, Heinz Schurmann. And then from Switzerland, Balthasar and Johannes Feiner, Franz Lachner, S.J. from Austria, 5 theologians from France, Louis Boyer, Yves Congar, André Fourier, Marie-Joseph Le Guillou, and Henri de Lubac. So that's quite a star-studded cast, for that commission. And it turns out that the author of this book now is talking to Benedict about this first meeting, and Benedict says, well, there was a battlefield there, and there were 2 sides. On the one side, Rahner, Feiner, and the Jesuit Peter Nemeshegi, don't know much about him. On the other side, Balthasar, Boyer, de Lubac, and Ratzinger. That's my team. So it wasn't. There were some disputes in the midst of that commission. So that's when they began. They first formulated the idea of having the journal, and then Balthasar says this recalls something to him, because he was Audience from Spire converted in 1940 on All Saints' Day, and became his directee, and she dictated 60 books to him, and he considers that she's absolutely essential to understanding his theology. And I was always a little bit reserved, but I figured, well, Balthasar puts me on to, de Lubac, whom I totally trust, puts me on to Balthasar. Ratzinger directs my thesis. Balthasar thinks this woman is really important, so who am I to say she's not, So I had a kind of indirect reliance on the writings and the person of Audience von Spire. She died in '67 before I was on the scene. So, but it turns out that in 1945, this is from Balthasar now, Adrienne demanded many times that I should start a journal. But I was a student chaplain at the time. I was completely unclear to me how I could do that, how it was possible. And she answers, not yet, but plan for it and get to know the people that will be part of that. We'll write it with you. A year later, again, she says, don't forget the journal. I didn't think much more about it. And then we came together in this International Theological Commission one evening in a pub, not a pub, what do you call them, a bar, I guess, in Germany, in Italy, on the Via Regia in Rome. During this meeting of the International Commission, we met and we decided to do it. So Balthasar sees this as a fulfillment of something he was asked to do by Adrienne. And the original name, by the way, was Adventus. It wasn't Communio, it was Adventus, but then they changed the name to Communio. And what happened was they started in France, and then that didn't come out when it should have in '71. In '72, the German edition came out. And then Balthasar says that once they decided to do this, everybody went back to their home countries, and he was kind of left to organize things. So Balthasar kind of became the organizer of all the meetings and the editorial decisions that were made year after year for the ongoing Communio magazine. So that is Communio from its prehistory before I got on the scene. And so I want to conclude now with something a little different, which is to say what happens next Well, we got Communio, and that's going, and that's great that it is. But I have to bring in one other experience to explain what's going to happen next. I'm a half Italian and 1/4 German, 1/4 French, but my parents drank moderately, but I never drank. And I got to college. It was a Santa Clara University was all Bronco drinking school, but I thought this is ridiculous. You know, they go out and buy a case of beer and get drunk and throw up on the floor. I said, that doesn't make any sense to me. Because I didn't drink in college. And then I went to France, and I began to have a little wine with meals, vin ordinaire, vin de table. You put water in it, you know. I thought, well, now this is something, it's not a drink, it's a meal. This is something which you need to make a meal complete. So I began to drink wine in France. And then I went to Germany, Bavaria, and I was living the first year in seminary with Father Schindler, and then second year with another Jesuit in an apartment. And some of you might be old enough to remember milkmen, you know, they come deliver milk in the morning to your house. Well, they don't have those in Germany, but they have beer men. And so you leave out a case of empties in the morning, you come back in the evening and there's a case of beer, you know. And I discovered in Bavaria, 13 different kinds of beer, not brands, but kinds. I mean, Bock, Double Bock, Märzenbier, Weissenbier, Pilsner, you name it. And when I came back for ordination in 1972, I drank my first American beer. And I spat it out. And I said, if you're going to call this beer, I need another name for what I had in Bavaria, because we're talking about a difference of kind here, not just degree. Incidentally, the reason for that is that during World War II, most of the American beer drinkers, the soldiers, went overseas, and in order to keep the market up, the beer makers began to add corn syrup, instead of malt, in addition to malt, to the beer, and so they adulterated the beer to make it lighter and more fizzy, and the women liked it. It was also cheaper. So when the guys came back, you know, the bad beer drove out the good beer, and so in the United States at that time you couldn't get any beer that was really any good. Anyway, that was my experience, and then a couple years later, I was giving some retreats to some Carmelite sisters. I see one back there. And during the question and answer period, they said, well, Father, you keep quoting Ratzinger and de Lubac and von Balthasar. Who are the great American theologians? I told my story about beer. I said, there's some good people here, but if you're going to call them theologians, I need another name. What I had there, you know. So a good friend of mine, John Galton, a layman, and I used to have reading circles, you know, and I would often bring in a book by Balthasar de Lubac and translate and quote a little paragraph or so. But they said, Father, we have to, you know, we need to have this in English, you know. So that's when we started Ignatius Press. The purpose of Ignatius Press was precisely to make available in English the works of these great authors. So now what? I just think, I grew a beard, I go to France, I get to Lubac, Balthasar, Ratzinger, Inspired Bouillet, the whole thing, and I can't write. I'm not a scholar, but I can understand good scholarship when I see it, and I'm a doer. And so we started Ignatius Press, and what happens in the most recently? Well, first of all, in 1988, Balthasar dies. He's 83 years old. In 1991, de Lubac dies. He's 95 years old. On December 31st last year, Ratzinger dies. They were friends. They were very close friends, okay? What happens 2 days later? 2 days later, January 2nd, is the feast of St. Basil and St. Gregory of Nazianzen. They were close friends. And then Gregory of Nyssa was the brother of Basil. So we have 3 4th century, we have 3 4th century theologians, bishops, fathers of the church who were bulwarks against Arianism in the 4th century. What a wonderful friendship that was, how fruitful it was for the church. And I think that not too distant future, de Lubac, von Balthasar, and Ratzinger will all be canonized and made fathers of the modern church. I really believe that. And now you're at JP2 Institute, he's already a saint. He might be a doctor of the church too. He's certainly a great teacher. And by the way, a parenthetical thing here. When another great story about de Lubac too. What time is it here? Okay. When de Lubac was made cardinal, then he moved to Rue de Sèvres in Paris. And when I go to Rome, I usually go through Paris, and I stop and see him. And so two things happen on those trips. One thing that happened is I come in on a night flight. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. I get there finally. And he's got a little suite there. He's got his little desk for his work, and then he's got his bedroom. He's got a little chapel. And so I said, well, could I say Mass in chapel? Of course, you know. At this time, he's in his 90s, or maybe late 80s. He served my Mass on his knees. He served my whole Mass on his knees. God. But anyway, I mean, you know, he has to go to the bathroom. So okay, this is after Mass. And I see, you go to the bathroom, and I see in this stack of letters here, I see one of these manila folders that says, Correspondance Papal, papal correspondence. What's in there, you know? So I opened the thing up, and there's this beautiful letter from Wojtyła when he was an archbishop to Lubac, and thanking de Lubac for all he's done, you know. And I rifled it, but, you know, I had to be quick about this thing, you know. So, but I saw these beautiful letters from de Lubac between him and Wojtyła, just glorious, you know. So anyway, I feel that what I want to do now, I'm getting old, I'm not going to last too much longer. Ignatius Press is not just me. We had a great team there, a wonderful family, really. You know, we have prayer together, and we're actually considered a church. Another story. When I got fired from the program I started at the University of San Francisco, 1987. Cardinal Ratzinger was concerned this might affect the Ignatius Press. And so I was in Rome and having tea with him and his sister Maria, and he was asking about this. I said, well, here's what happened. Basically, we used to have our tax exemption by being part of the Catholic directory. It's a blanket exemption. But my provincial, unknown to me, went to the bishop and had us taken out. So I went down to the IRS and talked to this guy, and he said, well, Father Fessio, Ignatius Press said, do you have a fixed body of doctrine? I said, well, yeah, the Catholic Church is teaching. Do you have regular times of prayer? Yeah, we have rosary, mass, divine office. Do you have an ordained minister? I said, yeah, me. Well, you're a church then. So I tell Ratzinger the story. I said, well, you know, Cardinal, Ignatius Press is a church which is independent of the Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuit order. And he had a great sense of humor. He said, wegen dieser doppelten Unabhängigkeit, Sie können orthodox bleiben. Because of this double independence, you can stay Orthodox. So I was going somewhere before I got wandered off on that sidetrack. I guess they call them rabbit holes now. But what I want, what I want to do is not have an endowment, because I don't like sitting on money. Never had a chance, but I don't want to think I want to do it. Building bigger barns. But there's so many things we can do. I want to make sure their legacy continues. Doing documentaries on them, having study groups, you know, creating courses or whatever that integrate their work. And, you know, I think John Paul II is part of this legacy, because the Communio theologians are theologians that you admire and you read. And I think this is important for the future. I think that the mid-20th century and early 21st century was a period which is going to stand out in church history. Like I say, it's like Basil, Gregory, and Gregory, you know. It's like Thomas and Bonaventure in the Middle Ages. And this is a theology which is so powerful, so beautiful, really beautiful. And these men are so holy. I just think we had a tremendous, tremendous blessing. And I hope you can help to carry that on, and we're going to try to do that too. Okay, that's my story. I will try and answer.
So we have time for some questions.
Hey, I'm actually a graduate. Sorry. Hey, I'm really thrilled to get a chance to finally speak to you. I'm a graduate of Angelicum Academy's Great Books program, and I actually beta tested your course on Ratzinger's Introduction to Christianity,
okay.
Both of which were really formative for my current studies at CUA, so thank you. You've spoken, I was just curious, speaking of your efforts to continue their legacy, I was wondering what you hope that your legacy will be.
So my ears not so good. Would you summarize that for me, that question?
Okay, she's wondering what your legacy will be.
Legacy?
Yes, your legacy.
Ignatius Press, basically, you know. It was something I didn't choose. I mean, all my life has been governed by impulse. I mean, I wanted to be an engineer and go to South America and build roads and dams and help the poor and be a catechist and so on. And I met this girl I thought would be a good companion to do that. And when I started talking about it, they said, well, you know, before I met you, I decided to go to the convent. I said, what? And so I tried to talk her out of it. I failed. I said, well, I'll be a Jesuit then. So, I mean, ridiculous, you know? And then I grow a beard and I get to France and this happens. So I just, where you see God's providence is looking backwards, you know? You do things, you don't know why you do them, all of a sudden you see there's a pattern, you know? God has been leading. So my legacy is my beautiful Ignatius Press family. You know, we have, there's only 20 of us, because we have partnerships with Magnificat, with the Augustine Institute, with Bethlehem Books, and with others. And we have, I mean, it's a very informal thing. Like Joey, who's our accounts payable guy, he wears Bermuda shorts and a T-shirt every day. That's all he wears. But we have people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. We got every decade we got some in there, you know. So, you know, only the church will last until the end of time. But I want Ignatius Press to last as long as it can to provide a standard of excellence in theology and philosophy and in the faith, you know. By the way, when we started in '78, there weren't many other ones around. They kind of all went south after the council. But now, thank God, there's a lot of good Catholic presses out there. Not as good, but still, they're good. Yes, anything else? Yes. Oh, the younger.
I understand that one of the people I think that you had met on the Rigi is Ferdinand Ulrich.
Oh my gosh!
I wonder if you could tell us a story of something, you know, that sort of summarizes his personality, something that stands out.
Ferdinand Ulrich, he just died a couple of years ago. He was a tremendous philosopher. I mean, I think he's up with Pieper as being a great philosopher of the 20th century. But his language is so convoluted that it's pretty hard to understand, you know. But I remember the first time I met him. I'm coming into Regensburg in 1972, and someone introduced me to him. He said, what are you doing? So I'm doing my doctorate. What on? The church. Die Kirche. Die Kirche ist Freiheit. The church is frei. I said, oh, nein. I said, man kann frei sein in der Kirche, aber die Kirche ist nicht Freiheit. You can be free in the church, but the church is, nein, doch. Die Kirche ist Freiheit. I mean, he had this metaphysical mind. It's just incredible. And I actually stayed with him and his wife and his children. I 3 or 4 nights a week, I sleep at their house, you know. And actually, this isn't recorded, is it, or is it recorded?
It might be.
Okay, well, I'm trying to write my thesis, and I'm at the new building of the Regensburg University. It was a brand new building they built in 1972, or 73, I guess it was. And it was just one building, but it was half a mile long. And it turned out that the theology library was actually the Anglistic library, English. So I'm slaving away at my doctorate, you know, trying to work on it. I had a real tough time with this thing, and so I'd work for an hour in the morning, and then I'd go to the Anglistic, and I was a chaplain at an army base with some evangelical Christians, and we had been reading C.S. Lewis together, you know. And I saw this book, you know, The Hobbit, T.R. Tolkien. There was a blurb on the back from C.S. Lewis. Well, that must be pretty good. So I started reading that, and then Lord of the Rings. I'd work on my thesis for like an hour in the morning, and then I'd read Lord of the Rings, you know. and I'd get on the bus, and I'd take it to the apartment, and I'd finally put it down, and I'd read it back. And I said to myself, you know, this guy's got to be a Catholic. Now, this is way before I even knew about it, you know. This is a Catholic book. And so it turns out, even he says, in his letter to Father Murray, Robert Murray, a Jesuit in London, he says, yes, Lord of the Rings is intentionally Catholic from the beginning, and in its revision even more so. And my model for beauty has been Our Lady. It's just a beautiful thing. Anyway, so I'm getting, you know, nervous about getting this thesis written. And so Ferdinand says, let's go up to Rigi for Christmas. Okay, so we go up to the Rigi, you know, this Rigi Häuslein, a beautiful chalet up there. It's Christmas time, snow's on the ground, and I've got all these little not flashcards, what do you call them? Index cards, you know, with, you know, church, you know, Mary, you know, Christology, whatever it is, and they're all. And so he looks at them and I'm writing it down, you know. So I worked with him on that, and that was how my thesis got really written. But then I had to go and catch a train at Art Goldau, which is a little village at the base of the cog railway that goes up Rigi there. And I had to leave at 5 in the morning. It was dark and everything. And so I had these 2 suitcases full of my notes and on my thesis, you know. And it was really, you know, heavy. So I took a branch I found on the side of the tracks there, and I put it on my shoulder with this 2 briefcase hanging down like that. And I'm going down the tracks. There's just snow. There's no road, you know, going on the tracks there. And the tracks go over this ravine with a little bridge there. All of a sudden, falls off. And I grab it. And anyway, I saved it. That's not so much about Ulrich, but that's about my time with him. And then another time, here's the story, because he was, well, 2 things. Up at the Rigi with him and a couple of other Jesuits, we'd have Mass, we'd have dinner, and he would sing his Karl Rahner song, and it would never end. Auf der einen Seite Kunman sagen das, aber auf der anderen Seite aber nicht. You know, and he would never. It was a long German thing. You could do it in German, you know. It was just, we were just laughing. We couldn't contain ourselves for laughter. So that was one thing. And then there's a second thing there. I forget. That's it. Anyway, I forget. But Ulrich, oh my gosh, he's so good. So good. Oh, another thing about him. He was big on structure of things. And he said when he was a little boy, he found in his grandmother's attic a German grammar, a Latin grammar, and he just fascinated by it. So he sees structure everywhere. And I've seen this dude, you know, you'll give him a book and say, Do you know, you've read this, Vic? No. You'd open it. This guy's a Kantian, and, he's totally wrong on his thesis. And, he would give you the whole, the book, just by flipping through, reading a couple of pages. And something else, here's some apology or like a confession. Way before Ignatius Press was even a gleam in my eye, I said to myself, he's such a wonderful Catholic philosopher, but his work has got to be made accessible, And I'm going to do something on it. When I get back to the States, I'm going to do something to make his work accessible. I've never done that, But I thought about it many times, and I've tried to do it a couple. But then I'll go pick up his book, Homo Business or something like that. I say, how do you? How do you do it? So I still feel bad about that. Although Bieler, I think his name was Bieler. There's a Swiss. Is he here? No.
That's his son.
Oh, your son.
Yeah.
Well, then is it your dad?
No,
then it
no,
has
no,
the
yeah.
collected Ulrich stuff. But he's also commented on it, right? It's not just collected. He has notes and stuff, right? Yeah. So your dad did what I promised to do but didn't do. Anyway. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. Oh. Now you know, Dean, why I didn't write down this talk.
Who would you say is the most underappreciated theologian or philosopher of the 20th century?
Who do I say what?
Who's the most underappreciated?
Me.
Thinker, philosopher, theologian of the 20th century.
Oh. I don't know. What do you think?
Probably you, yeah.
No, I don't. No one comes to mind. I'm sure there's a lot of them, but sorry, I'm a dry well on that one.
Question over here.
Time to eat.
I never checked the date, so I don't know if it's true, but I always heard that Communio was founded in part to offset the perspective and the influence of
Concilium.
Concilium. Is
Yes,
that true?
I've heard that too, and I was very surprised not to see any reference to that in here. But it's certainly true that some of the authors of Communio were originally in Concilium, and they left. De Lubac one for sure. I know that for sure. But that's a good question, and I don't know the answer, but I've heard the same thing. And as I say, Concilium started first. That was their first. And there were divisions there, and some of them left. And the ones who left were among the ones that started Communio. Yeah. Yes.
Just to dovetail off the question about the most underappreciated
Yes.
philosopher theologian, I was wondering if you had any comment about Dr. Edith Stein.
I find her impenetrable, but I think she's a great holy woman philosopher. Yes. I think, Ida Frederica Gers is probably not appreciated as much as should be. And also in English anyway, what's her name now? So she's a German novelist. She did the one on, Dialogue de Carmelite in French, Yeah, Gertrude von Lefort. I think she's. Well, here's something. A little Balthasar story. I was visiting him in Basel, and this was after Ignatius Press started, and someone had given me a book. It was about this big, by Manfred Hauke, on the role of women in the church, or women priests, And I wanted to get Balthasar's opinion on it. So I come in the evening, and I hand him the book. I say, "Have you read this?" He said, "No, I haven't." Could I see it? Sure. So we eat dinner, and then I go to bed. It's like a 4-story building. It's all his apartment, but every room except the kitchen and bathroom has bookshelves on all the walls, And I'm a numbers guy, engineering type thing. And so I went and I wanted to find out how many books are in this house. So I counted how many there were per foot, and then how many feet there were and how many total linear feet. I went down to the basement. They have the stacks down there like a library. And I estimated 30,000 volumes. But as I was going through, I would pick out a volume just at random, boom, pencil in the margin, And these German things, you just don't have a book by Nietzsche. You have a 14-volume collected works, right? And every volume he's got it marked. So the next morning, he hands me back the book at breakfast. He said, "Father, thank you. This was going to be the theme of the Theological Commission this year, but I'm going to tell him we don't need to. This book has it all." But he read that book overnight. And then I said, "Are there any German authors that you think are worth translating in English?" And he goes up to, he says, "Yes, everything by Pieper. Everything by Pieper. You really love Joseph Pieper." I think it's time to eat something. Unless there's, questions. There's some question down there?
Is there a question up there? Oh, right over here.
About you mentioned the meeting, the Papal Theological Commission meeting, and it was a battlefield. Would you be able to boil down the essence of that battle?
So you said it was a battlefield at the Theological Commission. Can you boil it down? What was the essence? What was the nub of the battle?
Well, I think it was, you had people like Ratzinger, de Lubac especially, who were considered progressives. Yeah, before the council, they were considered, progressives by some, and after the council, conservative.
Mm-hmm.
My position is they stayed the same, but after the council, what happened at the council was not what the council intended. It was sidetracked, And among those people who were distorting what the council wanted were people like Schillebeeckx, but also Rahner to a certain extent. So I think that was the battle between those who wanted to have continuity with tradition, innovation or newness, a renewal that had its roots in tradition, whereas Schillebeeckx, Rahner, and others, they wanted to make changes which really were inconsistent with previous tradition. So that was the battlefield right there. It's still going on, Yeah.
How about the synod?
The what?
Synod. How about the synod?
How about which synod? The one coming up? Yeah. One thing that Pope Francis said was pretty good to the German bishops. He said, "We already have one Lutheran church. We don't need another one." That was pretty good. I think I just read, where did I read it? I just read something quite recently about genuine synodality. Oh, I know what it is. There's a Cardinal Sarah, and I pronounce it Sarah because he's a French, and French always accents the last syllable. Cardinal Sarah, and also it rhymes with hurrah. But he's got a book now called "You Have Given Us So Much." It's his appreciation for Ratzinger, and it has beautiful. I mean, he's a beautiful, holy man. He's a good man. Great sense of humor too. But anyway, I believe it's in that book where he talks about synodality and what it really means in accordance with church tradition, and he points out the fact that bishops' conferences have no theological standing. They're not part of the official structure of the church that Jesus established, but they have a value. They have some usefulness, but they're not magisterial instances, So I think if the Synod on Synodality, this is, Phil Lauder just wrote about it last week. If the Synod on Synodality would actually discuss what the role of synods is, that could be very useful. But instead, they're bringing up again and again all the issues that have been the hot button issues of women's ordination, contraception, abortion, sexuality, all that kind of stuff. The good news is that you have here in Washington, D.C., across the street, I believe, the USCCB offices, right?
Yes.
There's one bishops' conference in this country. In Africa, there are 51 bishops' conferences. 51 bishops' conferences. And they all get a voice at a synod. So I'm hoping, I'm placing my hopes on the church in Africa. You think about the great men of, look, Carlo Renzi from the English-speaking Africa and Carlos Sarah from French-speaking. These are great men of the church, you know. And the church is growing there. And we're getting, I don't know how is it here, but I'll let you, California, we got African priests all over the place. And they're all good, you know.
Guess we're missionary territories, what you're saying.
We are. Well, we always have been. I mean, when I grew up, half of the priests in California were born in Ireland. The Dawson priests. Half of us were born in Ireland.
Yeah.
It's tremendous.
Father Petrega.
I can't fail to notice the correspondence of the years. The year 68, when they met for the first time to discuss Communio, was the year when Humanae Vitae was published. And do you see a correspondence between the rift between the theologians, Communio, Concilium, with regards to the question of contraception and Humanae Vitae and the church authority and all that?
Well, yes, and in fact, in 1978, we had a conference at USF. I don't know how we did it. We had 3,000 people came. It was the 10th anniversary of Humanae Vitae. And Bouillet was there, and Balthasar was there, you know. And of course, de Lubac. I remember when Wojtyła was elected, de Lubac wrote me a letter. He says, "We have a Humanae Vitae Pope," he said, you know. Oh, but by the way, another good book to read. All our books are good to read, of course, but Ratzinger wrote a book. It was basically radio lectures he gave in 1969 and 1970. It's called Faith and the Future. And the last chapter is called The Future, the Church of the Future. And he's very modest. He's like, I'm not a prophet. I don't have special insight, but I understand church history, and I'm reading the signs of the times. It seems to me that, and 50 years ago, he says that the Catholic Church will lose her institutional influence. We'll lose a lot of our institutions. We're going to lose a lot of our members. But there will be a intentional Catholicism that will form creative communities that will maintain the faith, not close off from the world, but will nevertheless nourish the fullness of the faith among themselves, so that when our narcissistic, nihilistic society reaches the end of the rope and is in despair, they'll be there for them, you know. And hey, when I grew up, I honestly think that the 50s and early 60s were a golden age for the church in history of the church. I mean, we had convents were full, parishes were full, we had lay societies, we had vocations. Now, it collapsed pretty quickly, so there must have been something wrong with that. But I think it was an abnormal time. I think what we're living in now is more normal. But coming out of that time of, I mean, you didn't lock your car or even your house necessarily. I mean, abortion, same-sex marriage, what are you talking about? You know, gender affirmation, you know, slicing up little girls in the 4th grade. I mean, this is completely bonkers. So, that wasn't the topic of my talk. But you got my opinion on that anyway. But that's why it's important, those of you who are at JP2, that's why it's important. It's not the numbers that count. It's fidelity, you know, family, religious vocation, those two things. That's going to save us. And by the way, one little homily here. I mean, this is an obvious thing, but sometimes it takes me 60, 70 years to figure out the obvious. But, you know, I pray the Psalms because I'm a priest. We pray the divine office. And by the way, you those who aren't priests, I recommend praying the Psalms. They're so beautiful. But it's interesting with the Psalms. You know, I'm praying the Psalms. It says, oh, my feet are sinking in the mud and I'm in despair. You know, wait a minute. I'm sitting in a rocking chair. You know, what's going on? I'm praying on their behalf. You know, just like Jesus was saving everybody in Peking and also in the Mayas and in Rome when he was in Nazareth and Jerusalem. He was living and dying for others. So that when we say, hey, I'll pray for you, that's one way. You know, you have a special need, you know, and you want to pray, okay, do that. But we're praying for the people down the street who aren't praying. Mm-hmm. And here's another Ratzinger story, so beautiful. Because when he became Pope, he said things I'd heard before. But before he became Pope, I never heard him speak or write or give a homily where I didn't find something new and you know, inspiring. So we're part of the Schülerkreis. You know, when he became Archbishop of Munich Freising in 1977, his graduate students said, well, let's get together once a year, you know, have a little meeting, which we did. We'd go to a monastery, we'd bring a speaker in, we'd have meals together, Mass, we'd have a seminar, we'd discuss things. And I was there one year with Father Schönborn, and the Pope gave a homily, not Pope, then Cardinal Ratzinger gave a homily on the 11th hour workers, okay? And ever since he's given that homily, I can't read that passage without thinking about what he said. So 20 years later, now Schönborn is a cardinal, and we happen to be together down in Southern California at Judge Bill Clark's place, and he's celebrating the Mass, I'm kind of celebrating, and it's that gospel. So as Christoph is reading the gospel there, I'm thinking, wow, that's the gospel Cardinal Ratzinger spoke on. And then he starts his homily. He says, 20 years ago, Cardinal Ratzinger gave a homily on this text, you know. And well, what was it? Now, I can't possibly say this in a way that's, you know, equivalent or even near equivalent to what Ratzinger does as a homilist. But anyway, he says, you know, the people who worked all day in the heat, they were upset that, you know, these people who came in the last hour got paid the same amount, you know. But he said, no, he said, those of us who've been working in the Lord's Vineyard from the beginning have a tremendous privilege. We've been with the Lord all day. And therefore, we should hold his people because they get paid for what we do. We've had the privilege of being with the Lord all day. It's a beautiful homily. Anyway, yeah. Okay. I'm half Italian. Okay. Overcomes my German.
Okay, well,
all right.
Thank you very much. You've been very enlightening, and we really are really glad to have had you here. Thank you. So maybe at this point.